to the Good News Bay podcast, where we are making Bay County brighter one conversation at a time. It's been a minute since we've had a podcast, but I felt a special desire to have this one because we recently had a storm that has impacted a bunch of different folks in Hurricane Helene. And we were within the cone for quite a little bit, or at least on the edge of it, and it created all kinds of unrest here in our hometown because many of us lived through Hurricane Michael, so it triggered all kind of post-traumatic stress. Many people are new to our community, and I know that we have learned from Hurricane Michael. I know we've made progress. I know that there's protocols, and I wanted to have you guys on because I was hoping you could share with us what we need to know in case of emergency. So I'm looking forward to that today. Bob Majka, you are our county manager. Good to have you back a second time.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Very grateful for that. I'd love to talk to you again one day about all the progress we've made since the last time we had you on.
Okay.
When you put a year or so in between those times, you make a ton of progress, and it looks a whole lot better than what happens week to week. And then we also have Valerie Sale with us, who is the communications director. Did I say that right?
I'm the chief of communications.
Chief of communications, and has been doing that a few minutes.
Almost 20 years now.
You were a staple. Like, I knew that you were the person that I needed to call because I know that when crises happen, you go on camera and you help communicate with us, and so that matters. We want to actually be able to help you along the way. You have a background in journalism, and so helping communicate during times like this is really kind of what we're after. So what I want to do, I just kind of want to state it from the outset, we're going to have people that are both watching as well as listening, some that are new to Bay County, some that have come because of a military background, many that have come just because they wanted to move to this community and don't have a military background. We have folks that live through the storm, some that are elderly and watching, and so they may see a lot of national news and may not know what to think. And then I'm hopeful this will get shared with some extended family of folks that live here that are worried to death about what they've heard. So maybe they'll watch this and realize that, hey, local is where it's at in terms of emergency management. Emergency Operations Center, EOC, is a term that we hear. What does that mean, and what do they do?
So the EOC is the command post, if you will, the command center, kind of the main node of the community leading up to and immediately after disasters. And so what we do there is we assemble all the decision makers from the different jurisdictions and the different agencies that are required to come together to hopefully effectively manage the preparation for, the response to, and then the initial recovery from a disaster. So we have decision makers in that room who are getting real-time information, who are charged by their different agencies to make decisions, so that when we need to make things happen, we can look right across the table at somebody and say, we need this, or here's the situation, we need to do this to affect it, or we need to maybe get this resource in town to address it. And the people that are there can actually, they have the authority to make those decisions and make things happen.
If I miss any part of this, tell me, but during Hurricane Michael, probably about 2 weeks later, I got an opportunity to go in the EOC and pray over some of those leaders. And when you talk about decision makers, you're talking about people like the sheriff and some of his key leaders. You're talking about those that are elected to office for different municipalities. We were discussing things earlier. You said there's seven different cities, I think,
right,
within our county. You've also got state legislators that represent us, national legislators. I know Congressman Sutherland, who was like former congressman at that point, he was still he was able to be in the room because these guys were all pulling together regardless of what side of the table or what their background was to make good decisions for our community. Am I kind of summing that up right?
That's the summary.
Was there for many days.
Right. Governor DeSantis came before he was sworn in. The storm happened, and so even before he was in office, he was in the EOC. Governor Scott at the time, now Senator Scott. So really, all those decision makers.
So leading up to, during, and after an emergency, this EOC is a place where those that need to make decisions gather, put their heads together, and stay in good communication on what decisions need to be made. Is that about right?
Correct. And we're in contact with our state and federal partners as well. So days in advance, let's say we take Hurricane Helene, for example, before that storm even had a name, there was staff in the EOC. The EOC is activated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week anyway. We just have different levels of activation. So on a normal day like today, we're at level 3. As things begin to ramp up, as we, let's say with tropical weather, we start seeing a disturbance that may or may not affect us. We're having communications with our state partners. We're on the phone with the National Hurricane Center, the National Weather Service out of Tallahassee, and we're starting to get real-time information on forecasts. And we plug that into some of our decision-making models, and we start having conversations very early on about things like evacuations and what are the status of roadways, what are the status of school, what may happen to the community based on, let's say in this case, with what type of storm is it? Is it going to be a wind event? Is it going to be a rain event? Are we worried about storm surge? Those conversations begin very early on, typically before a storm even has a name. And then as forecasts change and we look like we're going to be impacted in some form or fashion, then EOC activation levels are raised. We go to level 2. That's when we bring the incident command team in. That's the representatives of the first responder agencies that have a role in things like sheltering, EMS, fire, law enforcement. We start public information. Right. Valerie's always involved. Valerie is like, she's at level 1 every day of the week. And then when things really get rocking and rolling, if we're going to issue evacuation orders or open shelters, then we go to a full-blown level 1 activation, and that's when everybody that has a role in the community is physically present in the EOC, and we're actually in that response mode predominantly. We're answering calls, we're getting shelters open, we're dealing with evacuations, things of that nature.
So what I'm hearing you say is that there is a group on watch all the time for emergencies to look after our community, and the level of urgency changes, I don't know if I said that right, based on what is going on at a given time. Now, we talked a little bit about Hurricane Helene, and because it did come so close, there was lots of angst here locally. We had to kind of wait and see on some stuff. In those processes, like you said, that in general, whenever there is a decision that has to be made, like there's timelines involved. If you have to evacuate people, that takes a certain amount of time, right?
Correct. So we actually have modeling that's updated on a regular basis as developers come in and propose new subdivisions or new commercial developments. All of that impact gets put into this model, and we're able to look at that real time from a traffic impact. And what that projects out is the amount of time that it takes for us to clear evacuation zones based on the level of evacuation we may call for. So, for example, very early on, the information that we had from the Hurricane Center was that they were projecting Helene to be a possible Category 5 at landfall. So what that means to us operationally is a 35-hour clearance time. So we have to look at what does the forecast call for timing-wise for the arrival of tropical storm force winds, because we have to have our evacuations completed before the onset of tropical storm force winds. So we have to look at when that time frame is forecast. We have to back up 35 hours from that. We have to look at what time of day that is. So, for example, if we back up and that time is in the middle of the night, we're not going to issue an evacuation order in the middle of the night. We're going to back that up earlier so that the preceding day, when the sun is out, people are beginning the evacuation during the daytime hours. And so that's why, when you see, like you're seeing in the peninsula part of Florida right now, 72 hours out, and there's already evacuation orders issued because it takes so much time to get people out of harm's way. And you want people evacuating in the best of conditions, not in the worst of conditions, and that takes time. So we're looking at all of that very early on. We're looking at sheltering based on the size of the evacuation, what part of the population is impacted, how much space do we need to evacuate or to be able to shelter people. That dictates how many schools we have.
So another piece to this, and we don't have to get into a lot of the details, but I think that it matters for people to know that I didn't mention Superintendent McQueen, but our local school board superintendent is in the conversation
Absolutely.
with these emergencies.
Absolutely.
So getting kids home from school on time and before there's a threat. I know several years ago there was a big ice storm in Atlanta, and that scared everybody for a significant number of years, really, because some kids didn't get home like before the ice came. And so that's always a consideration for you guys. Like, is there tropical storm force winds, and are there school buses at the same time? Y'all actually have privy to the best information available with local meteorologists, and you're putting your heads together, right?
We are. So we have access to the Hurricane Center. We have access to the National Weather Service, as you mentioned. We communicate regularly with our local meteorologists at both of the news stations. We also have access to meteorology through both of the military installations. So we get a full, well-rounded picture of all these different perspectives and what different modeling and all is looking at. And that factors into these decisions. So school closures, for example, we don't want to have children standing at bus stops at the time of day when tropical storm force winds may be arriving or departing.
Right.
And so the superintendent is very involved in those conversations, and his team, they actually are the lead agency for mass care. So because they operate the shelters, that was a lesson learned from Hurricane Michael. So they have a seat at the table. They are the ones that are there that we're talking to about timing. How long does it take for us to get a facility open? When do we do it? Which ones are we going to use? So they're very, very involved in that.
Well, I know because we've discussed it, our hearts hurt for those that have been impacted by Hurricane Helene, and yet it was a good exercise for us, you said, as an agency or as a county. And also our hearts are really heavy for those that, even as we're recording this with Hurricane Milton down in South Florida, there is a fair amount of coordination with other communities. Like, I know that we reached out for help, but we hear from other communities as well when they have struggles, right?
Absolutely. And we're in the process of deploying some folks to help down south. The state of Florida is very good at what they do as far as responding to these incidents and planning in advance.
Another major partner of ours is the sheriff. And Sheriff Ford serves as the lead sheriff in Florida for the Florida Sheriff's Association disaster response element. And he already has personnel, for example, down in Pinellas County, pre-staged, waiting to assist that community. And we're partners with them. They needed assistance in getting their equipment hauled down there. So we made some equipment available from our Road and Bridge division to help do that. So it really is everybody working together.
I recall when we had the fires, we had fire departments from throughout the state of Florida staged at the mall there. I mean, there were fire departments from everywhere here.
I hate that it takes tragedy and crises to do it, but when those things hit this community, the best part of this community shows up, right? I mean, there's other times it's there, but it's people help people.
We have the opportunity, unfortunately, to do what you're seeing happen now in South Florida and what you will see over the next couple of weeks, which is the ability to send our personnel into other areas. And I can tell you from firsthand personal experience, I'm very proud of this community because of that tight-knit relationship. The way that it happens here in Bay County and the way that everybody works together, we are the exception. That is not normal. And we're blessed as a community that everybody, our personnel, for example,
I believe that's true, and I probably say it too much. People get tired of hearing me say it.
Yeah, but it is. It's real world. And so Valerie's a great example of that. One of the elements that we stand up during emergencies is what's called a Joint Information Center. And so she brings together the public information officers from all these agencies, who are all together, who are all making sure that they all have real-time access to the information. They're putting together information to release to the public that's consistent and works across. But without that element, we really can't inform the public, and so that's a very important part of what happens. But Valerie knows everybody on her team by their first name. She knows about their kids. She knows what's going on with their family. It's the same thing with the sheriff's office and all these other agencies. I mean, I know all the fire chiefs in the county by their first name. A lot of us go back, 20, 30 years. So we're not just meeting each other around the decision-making table in the EOC for the first time when these things occur. We're working together on a day-to-day basis on really the small things that people don't see happen behind the scenes. And then we exercise together, we train together. And then when the real deal happens, it's not a first-time experience. People meeting each other and having to get comfortable and knowing communication styles or relationships. And that just doesn't really happen in a lot of other communities. And we're really fortunate that happens here. Everybody's got this really amazing ability to put their ego in a box and sit down at a table and make the decisions that are really best for the community and not get kind of crossed up in all that, what's best for me or what's best for my agency. It really is what's best for the community.
In a moment, I want to talk, Valerie, about how we communicate, like the reality of the information. But I think one of the things that I would love for people to at least see through my eyes and maybe hear from my mouth is that there may be some places in our world where you really can't trust government. But my experience and my perception and what I know to be true, as much as I know, and I know a lot, I feel like I do in our community, we've got a group that is equipped, we've got a group that is committed. We've got a group that is experienced. Like, they're phenomenal at what they do. And on top of that, they care. And that gives me a ton of confidence in y'all's role of helping lead the emergency response in our county. And I think part of why I wanted to interview y'all is because y'all do lead that response. Like, if we're looking for information, where do we go for information? Well, what I want them to hear us say is that we got people that have loved ones that are hearing national news. They're well-meaning, but all of the state of Florida does not reflect our little community. And so, Valerie, talk to us about where we can get some information.
Sure. Well, Bay County we've got a number of social media accounts. We have Bay County, Florida Emergency Services on Facebook, which is for a county our size, we have well over 85,000 followers or so. That's comparable to Hillsborough and some of the other bigger counties. But I think it's because, as you mentioned, we've gone through so many events here. And so every time that we do, those numbers just start to grow and grow because people locally and from outside the area want to know what's going on here. And I feel like we do a pretty good job keeping them up to speed through that page. However, not everybody's got Facebook, right? And so we do have the baycountyfl.gov website where we will, in the event of a specific incident, for example, Helene, we populate a page specific to that, put it on the homepage, and all of that information that's available on social media will also be available on the website. And we have a widget to Facebook too, so that people can see that, and our Twitter.
Is that all updated pretty quick on the webpage?
Yeah. Yes, it is.
I'm asking that because sometimes it's hard to keep.
Well, it is. Traditionally, back in the day, you used to write out a press release, send it to the media, and then they would disseminate for you. But social media has really changed all of that. And so our local media, who we work very closely with during these incidents, know that they can go to this page as well. So there's social media outlets. We have My Bay County FL on Twitter, also My Bay County FL on Instagram. So those are some good ways to get information directly from us. But I think one of the most important things that people need to know about is Alert Bay, which we talk about a lot, and many people have probably heard about, but that is the county's emergency notification system. And so when we have critical information that needs to go out, so let's say we enact an evacuation or there's a bridge closure or something like that, then that is the first place that I will put that information out.
You had a really fancy academic term for what you can do with your experience on Alert Bay.
Curate.
Curate.
Right.
I love that. It's it's a polished word.
So not everybody wants to get those alerts all the time. And so that's the really nice thing about that program, though, is you can go to alertbay.gov or .com.
Yeah.
And when you sign up, you can put your times that you want to get alerts.
So I live at Deer Point Lake, and I love getting the alert that they're about to draw the lake down.
Right, we do that, yes.
But I don't go to the beach very much.
Right.
But those that are listening that do go to the beach, we may have some people from out of town. I don't know.
Yeah.
But you said that if there's a double red flag or something like that.
So one of the things that we have been doing this past summer is using that Alert Bay system to notify people who are actually on the sandy beach.
You said it geofences.
Geofences, right. So if you're on the sandy beach and the flags change, because sometimes they do change rather suddenly, we can send out an alert via Alert Bay to the people who are just on the beach.
And people want to get that stuff immediately, and we want them to.
And those are through the WIA alerts, actually. So
okay.
Right. So if you have a cell phone, you'll get that. You don't necessarily have to be signed up to Alert Bay for that.
So I've mixed some things together. But the WIA alerts are when your phone makes that.
So anybody who
you jumped out there and made it. I was chicken.
Anybody who was here during Hurricane Michael probably has maybe a not so fond memory of that, because we sent out an awful lot of WIA alerts at that time. But they were really an important way to get information out. And so
if we had really, really urgent information to get out, we have ways to do that.
Yes.
Right. So one of the examples we were talking about was, with Hurricane Opal, everybody kind of went to bed at night, 10 o'clock, thought they were going to be dealing with a Category 2 hurricane the next morning when they woke up. And they woke up the next morning to a Category 4, possibly going to be a 5. The storm sped up. We were issuing evacuation orders. This technology allows us, if we had to get that order out in the middle of the night, which would not necessarily be our preference, but we had to do it. If everybody went to bed at 10 o'clock and the forecast changed and we knew we were going to be evacuating next thing, we would utilize this. And if you're set to receive those alerts, you would get that in the middle of the night. It's an effective way for us to get to everybody that has a cell phone.
Point that you make there, Bob, because it is possible to turn WIA alerts off on your phone, and I really, really urge people to go in there and make sure that you've got them turned on, because we're not going to send those out unless it's absolutely critical information. And so that's something that folks might want to go in and check on.
Where would you check on that? Do you know?
It's in your, if you have an iPhone or get your kids to help.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. That's more than fair.
Ask your teenager or your young adult at home.
That's a good point. So
they probably can figure it out.
We're going to have links for all the social media accounts, as well as I guess there's a site that you would go to online to sign up for Alert Bay. We can put all that in the show notes.
Alertbay.org or alertbay.com.
Okay.
Either one of those will work.
Good.
And something for people that have family that are out of town.
Yes.
Pointing them to the county webpage, or pointing them to, because nowadays, just about every media market you can live stream. And so, if you're living in Oregon and, you're worried about a family member that, let's say, is down in Tampa right now, you can go online, you can download that, and you can watch the local media broadcast. And that's really what we want people to do, is pay attention to that local media, because
our local media is so important. They are so important in this process. They do a fantastic job here locally.
Yeah.
They are great partners in helping disseminate critical and important information. And so,
they're embedded with us at the EOC for a period of time. Gulf Coast State College actually has a radio station on property. That's another thing we would encourage people to do, which is a lesson learned from Hurricane Michael, which is everybody should have a battery-powered radio that they can also connect to the cigarette lighter adapter in their vehicle, because that will work. If your cell phone doesn't work, if you don't have access to the internet, we have that radio station there, and we can put information out over the radio, but you've got to have the radio on your end to receive it. So just like we push smoke detectors, this is October's Fire Prevention Month. And so there's a lot of conversation in the community right now with kids about go home and make sure you have a smoke detector, right? That's how we get you, right? We tell the kids in school to go home.
Oh yeah, kids will get you.
There's programs where, we give smoke detectors away. We'll go and install them in your house. Well, we really need to get to that same level with these battery operated radios. That's really an essential piece of equipment that everybody should have, because if everything else fails, like we saw with Michael, cell phones down, internet's down, TV's down. To Valerie's credit, one of the great things that she came up with after Michael was we started flying banner planes. I mean, you see the banner planes on the beach all the time with, buy crab legs or whatever. I mean, she went out there and got a banner plane and
trying to communicate. There was a real challenge trying to figure out how am I going to communicate this critical information to people who don't. When there's no way to. That is one of the main reasons you got so many WIA alerts after that, is because nothing was working. Nothing was working. We were printing thousands of flyers every day, and I have to send somebody to Walton County, get them printed, bring them back, and go and hand them out at the points of distribution.
So the battery powered radio is still the bulletproof way to get the info.
It is, because we can have that radio station stood up at the college. It's in that hardened facility. Also, if other radio stations are, if they're able to broadcast also, then you have the ability to receive that on that radio.
But at the EOC, they're getting information directly from the EOC, so there is less likelihood of maybe inaccuracies.
Yeah, the delay time between when we give that information to a local reporter, and then they get that information out locally, and then it gets picked up by a national news source like AP or somebody, and it gets to the national wire, and then it's picked up by the Weather Channel or somebody. I mean, you can be hours behind that information being released locally.
My cousin told me this, that, or the other, and
all that matters.
That may not be right,
Well, one of the things that I really would, you said really nice things about local meteorologists, and I think highly of them as well. One of the things that I observed during Helene is that not only were they really accurate, but one of the struggles even they have is that some of they have a viewing audience bigger than just our county. And so they have to even publish information at times that's not specific just to Bay County. So if they're talking about Okaloosa, Walton, that's one thing. If they're talking about Mexico Beach or even like Calhoun and Liberty counties, that was a big difference between being in Bay County and Calhoun and Liberty. We're partners with all of them, but just because they have to make sure that that part of the viewership hears something, that's still a reason that they want to know unless they say it directly, and sometimes they did a good job of saying, if you're in Bay County, this is what you can expect. But you'd want to go to the website to get the information of what the county itself is.
It's coming out of our EOC. If you want to get that information directly from us, you can get it at the county's website, which is baycountyfl.gov, or at any of our social media outlets. But we put everything on the website rather than sending out press releases now. That's a good way to congregate all of that information together.
But the media also knows to go there to look for it.
Yes.
So not to put you on the hot seat, but I think this is like helpful for people to understand. Like, I think because the storm was as big as it was, and it was aimed, it seemed like kind of this direction, and there was lots of talk about it nationally. The questions, out of fear, in large part, were why haven't we set up shelters? Why haven't we canceled school yet? Why haven't we given the word about this or that? We literally, I think, have explained that because all of those people that we've talked about, all the meteorologists, the ones locally, school board superintendent, military personnel, y'all were all having conversations about how this would impact us. And because you thought the impact was not going to even be tropical storm force winds, we didn't have shelters set up. And I literally told my people the next Sunday, I said, listen, if they don't have shelters set up, that says volumes about what the local community expects.
Well, one of the things that's not lost on us is the impact that Michael had. And, the community went through a very high stress impact. There are still people today who are in the middle of their own personal recovery process. And so that's not lost on us. And so it's incumbent upon us, and we have a moral and a professional obligation to make sure that we are not unduly creating fear.
Yep.
And so part of that relationship is the public does have to have a level of trust and kind of respect with us that they have to trust in us that we are doing our job. And so we certainly can understand after an impact like Michael, people questioning, why weren't shelters open or why weren't there evacuation orders issued? And part of that is fundamentally we're looking at the data, right?
Yeah.
So we're not guessing. We're not taking a laissez-faire approach to things. We're looking at the data. We're evaluating that, and that plays into the decision making. And so we don't want to, if we every time just arbitrarily say, hey, shelters are open, we're going to do this, that what happens is people become tone deaf and they become complacent. They open shelters all the time. It doesn't mean anything. Well, one of the things that, pre-Michael we dealt with as a community was because of Hurricane Opal, people made the decision that they would not evacuate again because of the way the reentry was handled. And even though we spent 23 years trying to convince people that we would do it differently and we would do it better.
You're pretty self-aware.
We really didn't have an opportunity.
It's true. They remember.
We just, we didn't have a chance to demonstrate that to the public until Michael.
Yeah.
So, with Michael, storm hits on Wednesday. We had people getting back in on Friday the same week, right? But what happened in that intervening 23 years was if you were new to the community and you went to your neighbor and said, hey, I've never lived in Florida. I've never been through a hurricane. What do I do? Your neighbor probably said, don't leave. They won't let you back. And we saw that. People did not leave. Now those very same people, if you went to them, would say, I'm never staying again.
It's true.
And so we have a healthy respect for that. We understand that kind of post-traumatic stress response, and we understand the comfort and the kind of the expectation that maybe opening a shelter might bring. But if it's not necessary and it's not needed, then we can slip back into that complacency where people start thinking, well, just because they open a shelter doesn't mean it's serious. And so we have an obligation to make sure that people know, one, that we understand that, and two, that the decisions we're making, we want to make sure that we're forwardly communicating. Hey, if we issue an evacuation order, this is a question we get commonly. We talked about this earlier. There's this whole conversation about, well, is it mandatory or is it voluntary?
Yeah, okay. Talk about that.
There's no such thing as a voluntary evacuation legally. When we issue an evacuation order, that means you need to go. You need to leave. If you're in an area that's threatened, if you're in an evacuation zone, we issue an order, it means you need to put your plan in place, whether that means going to stay with another family member, leaving town
Yep.
If you're capable of doing that or going to a shelter, that's serious. Now, the reason I say, it's not voluntary. We don't have a differentiation. When we need people to evacuate, you need to go. That's how serious it is. But likewise, we don't go around and make people leave. That's a personal safety decision that they have to make. So in that sense, all evacuations are really voluntary. You can choose to leave whether we issue an order or not. And we encourage people, if you feel unsafe where you're at, whether we issue an order to evacuate or not, and you want to go, we would encourage you to go. But we issue evacuation orders because of the threat for hurricanes, because of the threat that storm surge presents. Okay.
Yep.
The wind hazard follows on after that. So if we're going to be looking at sheltering, we're looking at providing a location for people who are in the evacuation zones who are going to be affected by storm surge to have a place to go. And that begins at Cat 1. And so Cat 1 winds, the typical Florida building code compliant structure will withstand that.
Right.
But there are people in the community who may live in substandard housing, RVs, things that may not hold up to a 75 or 85 mile an hour wind. But because we've opened shelters at that point for storm surge, those facilities are also available for those individuals. So you may not live in an evacuation zone, but let's say live in an RV, and you may not want to ride the storm out of an RV. And so then you have the ability to voluntarily go to a shelter if you choose to.
Yep.
So there's a lot of confusion. There's some legal ramifications too, especially if you're, let's say, here from out of town on vacation and you want your reservation canceled or modified and you want your money back. Mandatory evacuation is typically a trigger for that. So it's also important in that scenario that, when we issue an order, it's mandatory so that that transactional relationship can occur between people. And that's kind of outside the realm of public safety, but our actions do have consequences. And so we have to kind of look at all of that when we're making the decision. It cost us on average about $1 million a mile economically when we issue an evacuation order. So that's not lost on us. It's not about the finances, but we do want to make sure we're not playing Chicken Little, and we're not calling for evacuations that the data really doesn't support. And so they are data-driven decisions. We do factor in changes. That's why we always tell people don't focus on the forecast track, focus on that error cone.
Yeah.
For example, right now we're at in the forecast period with Hurricane Milton. There's a 70 to 80 mile average error in that forecast right now. Well, that's what that cone represents. So that's why, even though we may not be forecast to be the point of landfall, we're still making these decisions and having these conversations. And you could see us issue an evacuation order and open shelters, and we're on the far, left or right of that error cone. And the weather may be great outside, but we're doing that because we see that in the data. And so with Helene, what we saw in the data was very low probability of any type of wind impact, but we had to plan for tropical storm force wind because that's where we were. That affected our decision-making about schools. And then we had to look at rainfall, and we didn't expect to get a whole lot of rain out of it. So flooding was not going to be necessarily an issue. We had to look at what was going to go on north of us because what happens in Alabama and Georgia eventually makes its way to the coast. So we did have some of that conversation. And then one of the other aspects of this was Franklin County and Wakulla County. They don't have evacuation shelters. So there was a conversation we were having with the state at one point about receiving evacuees here. Well, you can't have school opened if you're going to have evacuees here from out of county. So that kind of fed a little bit into the conversation about should school be open or not be open on Friday? Because if we were going to have people here from other counties, having school was not
There's a lot going on behind the scenes.
Not a possibility. So
there is a lot going on behind the scenes that people may not necessarily know, but I do certainly see the trauma that people have gone through, in the interactions that we have with them on social media, and it's really a challenge. I understand.
Leadership in general now is a challenge. Giving information out and communicating is a challenge. I think that you've given us some information that'll help us with that. If they want to know what flood zone they're in, do they go to the county site?
They go to the county's website under emergency services. There's a Know Your Zone area that is through our GIS division, and so it's a layered map. You can put your address in there. It'll tell you what your zone is. That's baycountyfl.gov. And also, if you need help with Alert Bay, you can call 850-248-6040. Somebody
right.
can help you with that there. If you
My kid can't fix it for me.
Yeah. That way we do have staff who can assist with that.
Right.
That is good. That's really good. So, going to kind of sum it up here. Listen to the local forecast as far as meteorologists go. If you're wanting to know what the impacts will be locally, if we are not opening shelters or giving any evacuation orders, that says volumes about what all of the EOC believes the storm is going to be to our local community.
One thing I'll add to, as we discussed earlier, if you're not getting Alert Bay notifications in a situation like that, generally it's a good thing. Some people were concerned that they weren't getting Alert Bays. Well, it's because we didn't have an evacuation notice to give out, or a bridge closure, or a shelter opening, or something like that. As soon as that information becomes available and is necessary, we'll put that out there.
As a parent, I like the concept of say what we mean and mean what we say. And literally the essence, and it's not to belittle it or make it smaller than it is, but what you're literally saying is, we're not going to say 1, 2, 3, and here's an issue. You're going to give plenty of notice to get everybody out of harm's way. But if you say it's time to evacuate, that means it's time to evacuate. If you haven't said that, then that means that it's a personal decision you should make, but locally they don't believe that you're in harm's way.
Well, I think that's an important point to make, though, that if for whatever reason you feel like you need to go,
it's up
that's
to each
okay.
individual
That's okay
person
to do that. You don't have to have government tell you to do that.
All of that's true. And I think we learned that during this last episode. If people really feel strongly, they need to do what they feel, and nobody's stopping them from it. So, listen, thank you for all that y'all do. I know it's kind of a heavy subject, but I do think it's very informative for families. And I'm grateful for you guys in a busy hurricane season for you to take the time to help us educate people and point them in the direction to get the best and most accurate information.
And if I could add, one last thing, we've talked a little bit through the course of this about, how things go and how well they work. And I just think I'd be remiss if I didn't, just say that, that's the result of 800 employees that work for us and the job that they do every day. We're part of a very big team, but these things don't happen because of me or because of Valerie. It happens because of the employees that come to work every day. They know their job. They're invested. They're here. They love their community. And we had, I think, 400 of our employees that lost homes after Michael, and a number of our employees that actually had fatalities in their own families. And those people came to work every day. Mm-hmm. They were here every day. They were here to help their neighbors. And so all of this that happens because of them. And I'm just fortunate to be part of that team and work with those people every day. So they're really the all-stars that make it happen. So
that's a good word. I'm very grateful for the county that we live in, and I'm also grateful for those that staff that county. Y'all do a great job, and I appreciate you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us for the Good News Bay podcast, where we are making Bay County brighter one conversation at a time. Please help us share this good news and change the conversation by liking, sharing, and subscribing to the podcast.